The envelope was ivory, thick as cardstock from a law firm, with my parents' address embossed in silver. I knew before I opened it that it would hurt. My father's 60th wedding anniversary party, 40 years of marriage to my mother, and tucked inside the invitation was a folded note in my mother's careful handwriting. Ava, this is a formal evening at the Fairmont. Tessa's boyfriend comes from a very well-known political family. Please don't bring Hazel, and if you can't find something appropriate to wear, we completely understand if you'd rather stay home. We just don't want anyone feeling out of place. Have you ever read something that confirmed every suspicion you've ever had about the people who raised you? Drop a comment and let me know your story. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'd love to know who's part of this community. I set the note on the counter and watched my daughter, Hazel, who was 5 years old and sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, building a tower out of wooden blocks. She was humming something from a cartoon I couldn't name. Her dark hair was pulled into 2 uneven pigtails she'd done herself that morning because she'd decided she was old enough. I didn't cry. I think I'd used up all my tears on this family a long time ago. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. Ava, sweetheart, did you get the invitation? I did. Wonderful. So you saw my little note? I saw it. There was a pause. The kind where someone takes a breath before delivering a line they've been rehearsing in the bathroom mirror. The thing is, Tessa is bringing Spencer. His father is Douglas Whitmore, you know, the MP for Halton. Very traditional family, very public. And we just think, with the photographers and the guests, it might be simpler if you sat this one out. You know how these things go. You're uninviting me to my own father's anniversary. Not uninviting. Just, you're so busy with Hazel and finding a sitter and you'd have to drive in from Hamilton. It's a lot of pressure. We don't want you to feel overwhelmed. What she meant was, we don't want the single mother with the messy life standing next to Tessa and her politician boyfriend while people take photos. We don't want anyone asking what Ava does for a living and watching the table go quiet. I understand, I said. And I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't vent to a friend. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop the way a surgeon picks up a scalpel, with precision and zero sentimentality. Because here's what my family didn't know about me, what they'd never bothered to find out. I was not a junior policy assistant at a little government office, which is what my mother told people at her book club. I was the director of infrastructure strategy for the province of Ontario, reporting directly to the deputy minister. My security clearance was higher than most elected officials. I had designed the compliance framework for every major transit and energy contract in the province for the past 3 years. The Premier of Ontario had my personal cell phone number, not because we were friends, because when a $2 billion P3 contract hit a legal wall at midnight, I was the person who got the call. But to my family, I was still the girl who got pregnant at 23, dropped out of her master's program at Queen's, and moved to Hamilton to raise a baby alone. That was the version of me they'd locked in a drawer and refused to update. My father had said it plainly the day I told them I was keeping the baby. You had options, Ava. This didn't have to be the end of your career. He'd said the word options like he was discussing a stock portfolio, not his grandchild. My mother had cried, not for me, but for what the neighbors would think. And my sister Tessa, 3 years younger and perpetually golden, had hugged me and said, "Don't worry. Not everyone is meant for big things." I'd carried that sentence in my chest like a splinter ever since. But I'd also built a life that would make their jaws hit the floor. I just never told them. At first, it was because I was too exhausted, working full-time, raising Hazel alone, studying for certifications at night while she slept. Then it was because they never asked. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, my father would say, "Still at that little office, Ava?" And I'd say, "Yep." And he'd nod and change the subject to Tessa's latest accomplishment. My mother would bring me a bag of Tessa's old clothes and say, "These might work for job interviews if you ever decide to move up." Tessa would post Instagram stories from European vacations and tag me with a heart emoji, like she was sending charity to a less fortunate relative. I let them believe what they wanted. There's a strange kind of freedom in being underestimated. You stop performing and start building. My house in Dundas was a 3-bedroom heritage home I'd bought outright 2 years ago. Hazel's education fund was fully funded through a spa I'd been maximizing since she was born. I drove a 10-year-old Civic to family events because it matched the story they'd written for me, and honestly, I didn't care enough to correct them. My real car, the one I drove to Queen's Park when I had early meetings in Toronto, was parked in my garage with tinted windows and a provincial parking pass on the dash. But none of that mattered as much as one phone call I made that evening. "Genevieve," I said when the Premier's chief of staff picked up. "I need a favor. That infrastructure briefing we have scheduled for Saturday, can we move it to the Fairmont Royal York? 7 p.m.? Genevieve paused. "That's oddly specific. It's my father's anniversary party. Same venue, same night. I think it's time I stopped being the family ghost." Another pause. Then a laugh. The warm, conspiratorial kind. "I'll clear it with the Premier. She's been saying she wants to meet Hazel anyway. We'll take the main dining room, the one you have to walk past to get to the private suites." "That's the one." I closed my laptop. For the first time in years, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter. Like setting down a bag I'd been carrying up a hill for 7 years and realizing I'd reached the top without noticing. I looked at Hazel, who had finished her tower and was now giving it a name. "Fort Hazel," she announced. "Pack your fancy dress, Fort Hazel," I said. "We're going to a party." The week before the party moved slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't obsess. I called a friend, who worked as a personal stylist in Yorkville, and asked her to come to my house with a few options. She brought a garment bag with 3 dresses, and I chose the simplest one. A deep navy gown, clean lines, no embellishments. It looked like something a diplomat would wear. I paired it with small gold earrings and my grandmother's watch, the one my mother had never thought to give me because she assumed I'd pawn it. I bought it quietly at an estate auction 3 years ago when my parents downsized and sold off things they thought were worthless. Tessa texted me on Thursday, a selfie in a blush pink gown that I'm sure cost more than my mortgage payment, with the caption, "Getting ready for Saturday. Wish you could be there, sis. We'll FaceTime you from the party so you don't feel left out." I didn't reply. On Friday, my mother called again. "Ava, I just want to make sure you're not upset. Your father and I love you. We just think this particular evening isn't the right fit. You understand?" "I understand perfectly," I said. And I meant it differently than she thought. Saturday arrived like the final page of an audit. Clean, decisive, no room for ambiguity. I dressed Hazel in a little navy dress that matched mine. She looked at herself in the mirror and said, "We look like a team." I knelt down and straightened her collar. "We are a team." I drove the Tesla to Toronto. The 403 was clear, and the city opened up ahead of us in a spread of glass and light. Hazel pressed her nose against the window and counted the CN Tower 3 times, convinced it had moved since the last time she'd seen it. I parked at the Fairmont Valet, and the attendant didn't blink. He saw the provincial plate holder and moved quickly. Inside the lobby, Premier Elise Tremblay was already waiting with her husband and her daughter Camille, who was 6 Hazel's age. The 2 girls spotted each other and immediately started whispering about their matching shoes. Genevieve was there with a leather portfolio and a glass of sparkling water, looking like she ran the building, which she essentially did. "Ava, you look stunning." The Premier extended her hand and then pulled me into a hug. "I've been looking forward to this. And frankly, I want to go over the Eglinton East procurement numbers before Monday." "I brought the files," I said. "Of course you did." We walked toward the main dining room, the maître that led us to the center table, the round one beneath the chandelier, visible from every angle of the room, including the glass-doored entrance to the private suites where my father's party was already underway. I could hear the murmur of guests, the clink of champagne, the practiced laughter of people performing for each other. We sat down. Hazel and Camille immediately began drawing on the back of a menu. The Premier opened her portfolio. I opened mine. And for 10 minutes, we worked. We reviewed contract compliance timelines. We flagged 2 subcontractors whose environmental assessments had gaps. We discussed the political optics of a delayed LRT extension. It was, by all accounts, a normal working dinner. Then the glass doors opened. My father walked out first. He was wearing a charcoal suit that he'd probably bought for the occasion, his silver hair combed back, his posture the kind of rigid you hold when you want people to think you're important. My mother was behind him in a cream-colored dress, scanning the room the way she always did, not to see who was there, but to see who was watching her. Tessa came next, arm in arm with Spencer, a tall man in his early 30s with the confident jawline and empty eyes of someone who'd never had to earn anything in his life. Behind them, a trail of 20-odd guests in formal wear, all headed toward the private suite on the far side of the room. To get there, they had to walk directly past our table. I saw the exact moment my father recognized me. He was mid-stride, saying something to my mother over his shoulder when his eyes landed on the center table and his body just stopped, like someone had pulled a plug. His face went blank, then confused, then something I'd never seen before, afraid. My mother bumped into him from behind. "Douglas, what?" Then she saw me. Her hand went to her chest like she was checking if her heart was still beating. "Ava?" she whispered. "What are you doing here?" I didn't stand. I set down my pen, looked up, and smiled. "Hi, Mom. Happy anniversary, Dad. We didn't expect." My father was stammering, his eyes darting between me and the woman sitting across the table from me. Premier Tremblay stood up slowly, the way people with real authority stand, like time adjusts itself around them. She extended her hand. "You must be Douglas, Ava's father. Happy anniversary. It's a pleasure to finally meet her family." My father shook her hand mechanically, his face cycling through expressions like a slot machine. "Premier Tremblay, I had no idea you knew my daughter." "Knew her?" The Premier's smile didn't waver. "Ava is one of the most critical members of my administration. She's been overseeing our entire provincial infrastructure strategy for 3 years. We would be in very serious trouble without her." Tessa pushed forward, her pink gown rustling. Her face was flushed, and I could see the exact moment her composure cracked. "Infrastructure? Ava answers phones at a government office. She didn't even finish her degree." The silence that followed was the kind you feel in your bones. Spencer, standing behind Tessa, was staring at me, not with confusion, but with recognition. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping. "Ava Langford? You're the Ava Langford who restructured the Metrolink's procurement process? My father's office has been trying to get a meeting with you for months. He says you're the reason the Hamilton LRT didn't collapse into a federal audit." I looked at him. "That's correct?" Spencer turned to my father with a look that was somewhere between disbelief and pity. "You didn't know?" My father sat down in the nearest empty chair. He didn't ask permission. He didn't check whose it was. He just dropped into it like his legs had given up. "Ava," my mother said, her voice shaking, "why didn't you tell us?" And there it was. The question I'd been waiting 7 years to answer. "Because you never wanted to know," I said. My voice was steady, but I wasn't cold. I was tired, the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and only comes out when you finally stop pretending. Every Thanksgiving, Dad asked me if I was still at that little office, and when I said yes, he moved on to Tessa. Every Christmas, Mom, you brought me bags of Tessa's old clothes and told me they'd be good for interviews. You uninvited me to this party because you were afraid I'd embarrass you in front of Spencer's family. You decided who I was the day I told you I was keeping Hazel, and you never once, not once, considered that you might be wrong." My mother's eyes filled with tears. Real ones, I think. Though with her, it was always hard to tell. "We were trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourselves," I said, not cruelly, just factually. The way I'd state a finding in an audit report, there's a difference. Tessa's face had gone from shock to something harder. "You did this on purpose. You planned this whole thing to humiliate us at Dad's party." "I'm having a working dinner with the Premier," I said. "You're the ones who walked past my table." "I didn't come to your party, Tessa. You came to mine." The distinction landed like a stone in still water. My father hadn't moved. He was looking at me like he was trying to reconcile two photographs, the one in his head and the one sitting in front of him. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Ava, I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long time. He looked older than 60. He looked like a man who'd just realized the building he'd been admiring was made of cardboard. "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't retroactively make me part of this family. It doesn't undo 7 years of being cropped out of the photo. Because that's the thing about parents who only see you when you succeed on their terms, even their apologies are conditional. They're not sorry for hurting you. They're sorry they were wrong about you. There's a gap between those two things wide enough to raise a daughter in." There was a moment, brief, fragile, where I thought about saying more. About telling them how many nights I'd sat in my kitchen after Hazel was asleep, eating toast over the sink because I was too exhausted to cook a real meal, wondering if they were right about me. About the time Hazel asked why we never went to Grandma's house and I had to make up a reason that didn't involve the truth. About the morning I got the call from the deputy minister's office offering me the director position, and the first person I wanted to tell was my mother, and then I remembered that my mother didn't think I was capable of anything worth telling, but I didn't say any of that. Some things aren't for them. Premier Tremblay, who had the political instinct to read a room the way most people read a menu, gently steered the moment. "Douglas, why don't you and your guests enjoy your evening? Ava and I still have work to do, but I hope you'll take a moment to appreciate what a remarkable daughter you have." It was the kindest possible dismissal. My father stood up, steadied himself on the back of the chair, and nodded. He didn't say anything else. Neither did my mother. Tessa shot me one last look, a complicated, wounded expression that was half anger and half something I think might have been shame, and then she turned and followed them toward the private suite. Spencer hesitated. He looked at Tessa's retreating back, then at me. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you handled that with more grace than most people would. Thank you, Spencer." He nodded and left. The rest of the evening was, in a strange way, the most peaceful dinner I'd had in years. Hazel and Camille spent the meal drawing pictures of horses and trading crayons. The premier told a story about her own mother, who had been a seamstress in Trois Rivières and never understood what her daughter did at Queen's Park. "She still calls me and asks if I found a real job yet," she said, and we both laughed. The kind of laughter that comes from a place of understanding, not performance. Genevieve ordered a creme brulee for the girls. I had a glass of wine, and watched the city lights through the tall windows. Somewhere behind the glass doors, my father's anniversary party was continuing. I could hear music. I could hear toasts. I didn't feel left out. For the first time, I didn't feel anything about it at all. We left at 9:30. Hazel fell asleep in the car before we hit the Gardner Expressway, her head tilted against the window, her hand still holding the crayon she'd forgotten to put down. I drove in silence, the highway stretching ahead, the lights of Burlington blurring past. When I got home, I carried her inside, changed her into pajamas, and tucked her into bed. She mumbled something about horses, and then she was out. I kissed her forehead and stood there for a moment, listening to her breathe. My phone was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. The screen was lit up. 14 missed calls from my mother. A string of texts from my father. "Ava, please call us. We had no idea. We need to talk about this. Your mother is very upset." A voicemail from Tessa that I could tell from the preview was half apology, half accusation, and a message from my mother that simply said, "We are your family, Ava. You owe us an explanation." I read that last one twice. I owe them an explanation. I thought about all the explanations I'd given over the years that no one had listened to. I thought about the time I tried to tell my father about my promotion and he'd interrupted to ask if Tessa's flight had landed. I thought about the Christmas when Hazel was 3 and my mother had set the table with one fewer place than the number of people in the room, and when I pointed it out, she said, "Oh, I thought you might eat in the den with Hazel. It's easier that way." I picked up the phone. I didn't open the messages. I didn't listen to the voicemail. I opened the family group chat, the one called The Langfords with a maple leaf emoji and tapped the settings icon. The profile photo was from my parents' trip to Banff last summer. I wasn't in it. I hadn't been invited. I pressed leave group and watched the chat disappear. Then I put the phone face down on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and sat on my back porch. The night air smelled like cut grass and the last of the lilacs. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The stars were out, the real ones, not the Toronto kind that hide behind light pollution. Out here in Dundas, you could still see them. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something gentler than that, something that had been growing in me for years, like a tree I'd planted in bad soil that somehow found its own water. I felt done. Not done with anger. I'd let go of that a long time ago. Done with waiting. Done with the invisible audition I'd been running in my head since I was 23, performing for judges who weren't watching. A few weeks later, I got a letter from my father. A real letter, handwritten, on plain paper. No embossing. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been thinking about what I'd said. He said he didn't know how to fix it, but he wanted to try. It was 4 sentences long, and it was the most honest thing he'd ever written to me. I put it in a drawer, not because I was punishing him, but because I wasn't ready, and I'd finally learned that not ready was an acceptable answer, that I didn't owe anyone my forgiveness on their schedule. Hazel started grade 1 that September. On her first day, she wore a backpack that was almost bigger than she was and stood at the school gate like she was about to conquer a small country. I took a photo. I didn't send it to anyone. I just kept it for myself. Some mornings, I still think about what my sister said to me 7 years ago. Not everyone is meant for big things. She was right about one thing. Not everyone is meant for the big things that other people decide are big. Some of us build our own quiet version of extraordinary, and the people who missed it don't get to claim it after the fact. The best revenge isn't a speech or a reveal or a dramatic entrance. It's the morning after, when you wake up in a house you earned, next to a kid who thinks you're the whole world, and you realize that the people who counted you out haven't crossed your mind in weeks. It's not loud. It's not cinematic. It's just your life, finally, on your own terms. And the silence that follows isn't empty. It's full of everything you built while no one was watching.